My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old, and I've never told this story to anyone. Until today. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city and country you're listening from right now. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please do. Maybe this story will sound a little familiar to you too. There are secrets that carve themselves so deep into your bones that you start to believe they're just part of who you are, like scars that have become so familiar you forget they were ever wounds. I've been carrying this one for 5 years now, and speaking it out loud feels like confessing to a crime I'm not even sure I committed. But here I am, with my hands shaking and my heart beating so fast I can hear it in my ears, about to tell you about the 3 months that changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and who I really am when nobody's watching. My sister Jessica has always been the golden one in our family. 2 years older than me, she's the kind of person who lights up every room she enters, who makes strangers feel like old friends, who has this effortless way of making everyone around her feel special. Growing up in our small house in Columbus, Ohio, I was always Jessica's little sister, the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who watched from the sidelines while she collected friends and admirers like some people collect butterflies. I loved her fiercely, but I also envied her in that bone-deep way that only siblings can understand, the kind of envy that feels like love and resentment twisted together until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. When Jessica brought Michael home for Thanksgiving our senior year of college, I knew immediately that this one was different. She'd had boyfriends before, sweet boys who worshipped her from afar, and confident ones who thought they could tame her. But Michael looked at her like she was something precious he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch. He was tall and lean with dark hair that always looked slightly messy, like he'd just run his hands through it, and these incredibly blue eyes that seemed to see everything. But what I noticed most that first night, as I helped Mom clear the dinner dishes while Jessica and Michael sat on the living room couch talking in low voices, was the way he laughed at her jokes. Not the polite laughter you give someone you're trying to impress, but the real kind. The kind that bubbles up from somewhere genuine and surprised. They were together for 4 years. 4 years of family dinners where Michael would help Dad fix things around the house and debate politics with my Uncle Jim. 4 years of holidays where he fit so seamlessly into our chaos that it was like he'd always been there. 4 years of watching my sister become the best version of herself in the glow of being completely, utterly loved. Michael became woven into the fabric of our family so tightly that when they finally broke up last spring, it felt like losing a limb we didn't know we'd grown dependent on. The breakup was gentle, the way some endings are when two people love each other, but can't quite figure out how to build a life together. Jessica had gotten a job offer in Portland, and Michael's photography career was finally taking off in Chicago. They tried long distance for 6 months, but the strain of living in different time zones, of loving each other through phone screens and hurried weekend visits, eventually wore them down to nothing. Jessica cried for weeks after it ended, but she cried the way you cry for something beautiful that simply couldn't survive the real world, like mourning a perfect day that has to end when the sun goes down. Michael didn't disappear from our lives entirely after the breakup. He'd still text on birthdays, still ask how Jessica was doing when he ran into Dad at the hardware store, still send Christmas cards to the whole family with his photographs printed inside like little windows into the life he was building without us. It was mature and civilized, and everything a modern breakup should be, which made what happened next feel even more like a betrayal of something sacred I couldn't name. The first time I saw Michael after the breakup was 8 months later, at my cousin Rachel's wedding in Indianapolis. Jessica had come with her new boyfriend, a guy named Trevor from her marketing firm who had kind eyes and steady hands, and looked at her with genuine adoration. And Michael had driven down alone. I'd volunteered to help with the wedding setup, partly because I loved Rachel and wanted her day to be perfect, and partly because staying busy meant I didn't have to make awkward small talk with relatives who kept asking when I was going to find a nice boy like Jessica had. I was arranging centerpieces in the reception hall when Michael walked in, looking slightly lost and holding a gift bag with what I later learned was a beautiful silver picture frame he'd chosen, because he remembered Rachel mentioning she collected vintage frames. The late afternoon light was streaming through the tall windows, casting everything in gold, and when he saw me, his face broke into this smile that made my chest tight with something I couldn't identify. "Sarah," he said, and the way he said my name, like he was genuinely happy to see me, like I was someone worth being happy about, made me realize that in 4 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, we'd barely ever had a real conversation, just the two of us. I was always Jessica's little sister, the quiet one in the corner with a book, the one who made dry comments that made everyone laugh, but never really inserted myself into the center of things. We ended up sitting together at the reception, at the singles table in the back corner, where the music was just quiet enough that you could actually have a conversation. Michael told me about his photography work, about a series he was doing on small-town diners across the Midwest, about how he'd learned to see beauty in places he'd never noticed before. I told him about my job at the public library, about the novel I was writing in my spare time, about how I'd always felt like I was waiting for my real life to begin while everyone else was already living theirs. There was something different about talking to him that night, something I'd never experienced with any of the boys I'd dated in college or the few men I'd gone out with since. He asked questions like he actually cared about the answers, like my thoughts and opinions mattered, like I was someone worth knowing beyond my connection to Jessica. When I mentioned that I'd always wanted to travel but had never been brave enough to go anywhere alone, he told me about a photography workshop in Maine he'd heard about, for people who wanted to learn to see the world differently. When I laughed and said I couldn't even take a decent selfie, he said he thought I had the kind of eyes that would see things other people missed, the kind of quiet observation skills that made the best photographers. We danced to 3 songs that night, At Last, by Etta James, some forgettable pop song that had everyone on the floor, and finally, The Way You Look Tonight, which was slow and sweet, and made me hyper-aware of every place his hand touched my waist, my shoulder, the small of my back. When he walked me to my car afterward, there was this moment where we stood too close, where the October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of the bourbon he'd been nursing all evening. For just a second, I thought he might kiss me, and the possibility sent electricity racing through my veins and straight to my heart. Instead, he stepped back and said, "It was really good to see you, Sarah. Really good. I hope we can do this again sometime." I drove home with the windows cracked, needing the cold air to clear my head, trying to convince myself that what I was feeling was just the loneliness of being single at a wedding, just the romance of slow dancing and fairy lights and too much champagne. But the feeling didn't fade when I woke up the next morning, or the next week, or the next month. It grew, like a seed planted in soil I didn't know was fertile, until I found myself checking Michael's Instagram more than I should have, until I started writing him into the characters in my novel without meaning to, until I caught myself wondering what would have happened if I'd met him first, before Jessica, before their 4-year love story that had become part of my family's mythology. The first text came 2 weeks after the wedding. Just a simple message. Saw this and thought of you, with a photo attached of an old-fashioned library card catalog he'd found at an estate sale. It was sweet and innocent, and made my heart race in a way that felt dangerous. I texted back a laughing emoji, and a comment about how I missed the days when finding information required actual detective work, and somehow that turned into an hour-long conversation about books and music and all the small things you discover about someone when you're not seeing them through the lens of family gatherings and shared history. The texting became a regular thing. Nothing inappropriate. Just checking in, sharing articles and photos and random thoughts throughout the day. Michael would send me pictures from his road trips, small-town diners and vintage motels and stretches of highway that looked like scenes from a movie about America that doesn't exist anymore. I would send him passages from books I was reading, quotes that stuck with me, questions about writing and creativity, and how to find meaning in ordinary moments. It felt like friendship, mostly, except for the way my pulse quickened every time his name appeared on my phone screen, except for the way I found myself crafting messages more carefully than I crafted anything else I wrote. Jessica was thriving in Portland, posting pictures of hiking trips and farmers markets and cozy coffee shops where she worked on her laptop. She'd been dating Trevor for 6 months and seemed genuinely happy, lighter somehow, like she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be without the weight of a long-distance relationship pulling at her. I was happy for her, truly happy, but I was also falling apart in ways I didn't know how to articulate, even to myself. The first time Michael and I were alone together was in December, 3 weeks before Christmas. He was driving through Columbus on his way to photograph a story about a small town in southern Ohio, and he asked if I wanted to get coffee, catch up in person. We met at this little place downtown called North Star Cafe, the kind of spot with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls where you can sit for hours without anyone bothering you. I got there first and chose a table in the back corner, suddenly nervous in a way that made my hands shake as I stirred sugar into my latte. When Michael walked in, brushing snow off his jacket and scanning the room until he spotted me, I felt something shift in my chest, something that had nothing to do with caffeine or cold weather. He looked older somehow, more serious, Like the months since Jessica had moved away had changed him in subtle ways I couldn't quite name. When he hugged me hello, I caught the scent of his shampoo and the faint smell of winter air clinging to his clothes, and I had to resist the urge to hold on longer than was appropriate for someone who was supposed to be just my sister's ex-boyfriend. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, about everything and nothing. Michael told me about the photography series he was working on, about how driving through small towns across the Midwest had taught him that there were entire worlds existing parallel to his own, full of people living rich, complex lives he'd never imagined. I told him about my novel, which was finally starting to feel like something real instead of just a file on my laptop that I opened and closed without making any real progress. He asked to read some of it, which terrified and thrilled me in equal measure, because nobody had ever asked to read my writing before, not even Jessica. As the afternoon wore on and the coffee shop filled and emptied around us, our conversation turned more personal. Michael talked about the loneliness of being on the road so much, about how he'd thought traveling for work would be glamorous, but mostly it just meant eating dinner alone in strange towns and missing the comfort of familiar routines. I talked about feeling stuck, about how everyone else seemed to have figured out how to be an adult while I was still working at the same job I'd had in college, still living in the same small apartment, still writing the same novel I'd started 3 years ago. "You know what I've always noticed about you?" Michael said, and his voice was softer now, more intimate, like we were sharing secrets instead of just making conversation. "You see things. At family dinners, at parties, you'd be sitting quietly in the corner, but I could tell you were taking everything in, processing it, understanding things about people that they probably didn't understand about themselves. I always wondered what you were thinking about, what you were seeing that the rest of us were missing." The way he said it, with this genuine curiosity in his voice like I was a mystery worth solving, made my throat tight with emotion I couldn't name. I wanted to tell him that what I'd been thinking about, at all those family gatherings, was how happy Jessica looked with him, how he made her laugh in ways I'd never heard before, how lucky she was to have found someone who loved her so completely. But I also wanted to tell him that I'd been watching him too, noticing the way he listened when people talked, the way he remembered small details about everyone's lives, the way he seemed to genuinely care about people in a world where so many men I'd met seemed to care only about themselves. When we finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting, and the December air was sharp with the promise of snow. Michael walked me to my car, and we stood there for a moment in the parking lot, neither of us seeming to want the afternoon to end. The streetlights were just coming on, casting everything in that blue twilight that makes ordinary moments feel cinematic, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic on High Street, mixing with the closer sound of our breathing in the cold air. "This was really nice," Michael said, and he was standing closer than he needed to, close enough that I could see the way his breath made small clouds in the cold air, close enough that when he reached out to brush a snowflake off my jacket, his fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary. "Yeah," I managed to say, though my voice sounded strange even to me, rougher and more uncertain than usual. It was. For a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Columbus, Ohio, while the first snow of winter began to fall around us like something out of a movie about people who fall in love at the wrong time with the wrong person. I thought he might kiss me, and the possibility sent heat racing through my body despite the December cold. I thought I might let him, despite everything I knew about loyalty and family, and the sacred bonds between sisters. Instead, he stepped back and said, "I should let you go. Drive safe, okay? The roads are getting slick." I nodded and got into my car, and as I drove home through the gathering snow, I felt like I was carrying something fragile and dangerous, something that could shatter if I held it too tightly or destroy everything I cared about if I let it grow. But I couldn't seem to stop it from growing, couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me in that parking lot, couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if one of us had been brave enough to cross the line we were both pretending didn't exist. The next 3 months were the most intense and confusing of my life. Michael and I started texting more frequently, conversations that began with innocent check-ins and gradually became more personal, more intimate, more dangerous. We talked about our dreams and fears, about the things we'd never told anyone else, about the loneliness of being adults who hadn't quite figured out how to be happy. We shared photos and songs and articles that made us think of each other, building this private world of inside jokes and shared references that existed entirely in the space between our phones. I knew it was wrong, knew I was betraying Jessica in ways that went deeper than she could ever know, but I couldn't seem to stop. Every rational part of my brain told me to end the conversations, to put distance between myself and the growing feelings I was trying so hard to deny. But then Michael would send me a photo of a sunset he'd seen while driving through Indiana, or a quote from a book he thought I'd like. or just a simple thinking of you that made my heart race and my resolve crumble. The second time we met in person was in January, when Michael had another assignment that took him through Columbus. This time, we didn't pretend it was just coffee. We went to dinner at a small Italian place on the other side of town, somewhere we were unlikely to run into anyone who knew us, and afterward we walked through the snowy streets downtown, talking and not talking, both of us aware of the electricity crackling between us, both of us pretending we didn't notice. When it started snowing harder, we ducked into a bar called the Short North Tavern, a dimly lit place with brick walls and craft beer and enough noise that we could talk without being overheard. We found a booth in the back corner, and Michael slid in next to me instead of across from me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his leg against mine, close enough that when he leaned over to point something out on my phone, his shoulder pressed against mine and I caught the scent of his cologne mixed with the faint smell of winter air and beer. We talked for hours that night, about books and music and travel, about our families and our fears and our dreams for the future. Michael told me about growing up in a small town in Michigan, about feeling like an outsider until he discovered photography and learned to see beauty in places other people overlooked. I told him about always feeling like Jessica's shadow, about never quite knowing who I was when I wasn't being someone's sister or daughter or girlfriend, about the novel I was writing that felt like the first thing I'd ever done that was entirely my own. "You know what's funny?" Michael said, and his voice was softer now, more intimate, like the beer and the dim lighting, and the late hour had dissolved some invisible barrier between us. I spent 4 years with Jessica, and I loved her. I really did. But I always felt like I was performing some version of myself, trying to be the man she needed me to be. With you, I feel like I can just be me. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense, because I felt the same way with him. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be funnier or prettier or more interesting than I actually was. I wasn't comparing myself to Jessica or wondering if I was enough. With Michael, I was just Sarah. Not the quiet sister, not the bookish one, not the girl who watched from the sidelines. Just me. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. When he reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers threading through mine like they'd been designed to fit together, I didn't pull away. When he leaned closer and told me I was beautiful, that he'd always thought I was beautiful, but had never been allowed to say it, I felt something break open in my chest, something that had been locked away for so long I'd forgotten it was there. The kiss happened in the parking lot behind the bar, while snow fell around us, and the neon sign from the liquor store across the street cast everything in pink and blue light. It was tentative at first, like he was asking permission, and then desperate, like we were both drowning and this was our only chance at air. I kissed him back with 5 months of suppressed longing, with all the want I'd been trying so hard to deny, with the terrible, beautiful knowledge that this was wrong and perfect, and going to destroy everything I thought I knew about who I was. Afterward, we stood there in the snow, staring at each other like we'd just crossed a line we could never uncross, which in a way we had. Michael's hands were still on my face, his thumbs tracing the line of my cheekbones like he was trying to memorize the feel of my skin, and I could see my own confusion and desire and guilt reflected in his eyes. "We can't do this," he said, but his voice was rough with want, and his hands didn't move away from my face. "I know," I whispered back, and I did know. I knew it was wrong and complicated and potentially devastating, but I also knew that I'd never felt anything like what I was feeling in that moment, standing in a parking lot in Columbus while snow fell around us like a blessing or a curse. But we did do it. We kept doing it, meeting in secret like teenagers sneaking around, finding each other in coffee shops across town where no one would recognize us, in Michael's hotel room when he had assignments that brought him through Ohio. We told ourselves we weren't hurting anyone, that what Jessica didn't know couldn't hurt her, that we deserved this small happiness even if it came at the cost of everything we'd been taught about loyalty and family and the sacred bonds between sisters. The physical relationship was intense in a way that scared me, desperate and consuming and tinged with the knowledge that what we were doing was forbidden. Michael would hold me afterward like he was trying to memorize the feel of my body against his, and I would trace the lines of his face in the afternoon light, filtering through hotel room curtains, both of us knowing that this couldn't last, that eventually we would have to choose between this secret world we'd created and the real world where Jessica existed, where family loyalty mattered, where consequences lived and breathed and demanded their due. For 3 months, we existed in this bubble of stolen moments and borrowed time. 3 months of lying to Jessica when she called to check in, when she asked why I seemed different, why I was glowing, why I seemed happy in a way I'd never been before. 3 months of deleting text messages and making excuses and feeling like I was living a double life, split between the sister Jessica thought she knew and the woman who was falling in love with her ex-boyfriend. Because I was falling in love with Michael, completely and desperately, and in a way that terrified me. Not just because he was Jessica's ex, but because loving Michael meant confronting the possibility that I had spent my entire life defining myself in relation to other people, that I had never really known who I was when I wasn't being someone's sister or daughter or friend. With Michael, I felt like myself for the first time, and that self was someone worth loving, someone worth choosing, someone worth fighting for. But the guilt was eating me alive from the inside out. Every time Jessica called, every time she talked about her new life in Portland, or mentioned Michael casually in conversation, every time she told me she loved me or asked for advice about Trevor, I felt like I was betraying something sacred and irreplaceable. I started having dreams where Jessica found out, where she looked at me with disappointment and hurt that cut deeper than any anger could have. I would wake up in Michael's arms feeling sick with shame, and he would hold me while I cried, both of us knowing that what we were doing was unsustainable, but neither of us knowing how to stop. The beginning of the end came in March, when Jessica called to tell me she was coming home for a surprise visit. Trevor was going to be in Chicago for work, she said, and she missed everyone and wanted to spend a long weekend in Columbus, just her and me and our parents, like old times. She sounded so excited, so genuinely happy to be coming home, that I felt something crack inside my chest that I knew would never fully heal. Michael was supposed to be in town that same weekend for a wedding photography job, and we'd planned to spend Saturday night together at a little bed and breakfast outside the city, our first real night alone without the constant awareness that we were stealing time from other obligations. When I told him Jessica was coming home, we both knew without saying it that our secret world was about to collide with reality in a way that would change everything. We met at the coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation, and for an hour we tried to pretend everything was normal, that we were just two people having lunch instead of two people whose relationship was about to implode under the weight of family loyalty and guilt, and all the ways love can complicate the simple act of being decent to the people who matter most. We have to stop, I finally said, and the words felt like swallowing glass. We have to stop before she gets hurt, before we destroy everything. Michael nodded, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when he reached across the table to take my hand one last time, his fingers were shaking. "I love you," he said, and it was the first time either of us had said it out loud, which made everything both easier and impossibly harder. "I love you too," I whispered back, and I meant it in a way that went deeper than anything I'd ever felt before, deeper than the crushes I'd had in college, or the comfortable affection I'd felt for the few men I'd dated since. I loved Michael in a way that felt like coming home and like losing myself all at once, and ending it felt like choosing to amputate a part of myself that I'd only just discovered. We ended it that afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop in Columbus, while the March wind rattled the windows and other people went about their normal lives, unaware that two people in the corner booth were quietly destroying something beautiful and impossible, and probably doomed from the start. We deleted each other's numbers, though we both knew the digits by heart. We promised not to text or call or reach out, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how lonely we got. We agreed that Jessica's happiness mattered more than our own, that family loyalty trumped personal desire, that some loves were meant to be sacrificed on the altar of doing the right thing. When Jessica came home that weekend, I threw myself into being the perfect sister. I took her to all our old favorite places, listened to her talk about Portland and Trevor, and her new job with genuine enthusiasm, helped her pick out birthday presents for our parents, and pretended that my heart wasn't breaking every time she smiled. She looked happy and healthy, and radiant with the kind of contentment that comes from building a life that fits you like a well-tailored dress. And seeing her like that made me believe that Michael and I had made the right choice, even as it felt like dying a little bit every day. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I threw myself into work, into writing, into anything that would distract me from the Michael-shaped hole in my chest. I started dating other people, kind, available men who were nothing like him, who couldn't hurt me because I couldn't love them the way I'd loved him. I smiled at Jessica's engagement party when she and Trevor got engaged 6 months later, helped her plan a beautiful fall wedding, stood next to her as her maid of honor, while she promised to love and cherish and honor someone who deserved her completely. Michael wasn't at the wedding. He'd moved to Seattle for a job with a travel magazine, and Jessica said he'd sent his congratulations along with a beautiful coffee table book about the Pacific Northwest that now sits on her and Trevor's bookshelf. I wondered if he thought about me when he was photographing the mountains and forests of his new home, if he remembered our afternoons in coffee shops or the way I used to trace the lines of his face in the fading light of hotel room afternoons. But I didn't reach out, didn't break the promise we'd made to each other and to Jessica's right to be happy. It's been 2 years since Jessica's wedding now, and she's pregnant with her first child. She calls me every week to update me on doctor's appointments and baby names and all the small miracles and anxieties of creating new life. She sounds happy, genuinely and completely happy, in a way that makes me believe that Michael and I made the right choice in choosing her peace over our own desire, her future over our present, her right to trust her sister over our right to love each other. But late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment with a book I can't concentrate on and music that reminds me of conversations we used to have, I wonder if Jessica ever suspected. If she noticed the way Michael and I were careful never to be alone in the same room at family gatherings before he moved away, the way we both seemed diminished somehow after that last conversation in the coffee shop, the way I threw myself into being the perfect sister, with an intensity that must have seemed strange to someone who knew me as well as she did. Sometimes I think about the version of my life where I told her the truth, where I confessed what had happened and asked for her forgiveness and trusted that our bond was strong enough to survive my betrayal. Would she have been angry? Hurt? Would she have understood that what happened between Michael and me wasn't about her? Wasn't about competition or jealousy, or any of the complicated psychology that defines relationships between sisters? Would she have seen that I fell in love with him, not because he was hers first, but because he was the first person to see me as entirely separate from her, entirely my own person, entirely worth loving? But I didn't tell her, and now it feels too late, like a secret that has calcified into something permanent and unchangeable. I carry it with me everywhere, this knowledge of who I am when no one is watching, when I am not being the good sister or the supportive daughter or any of the roles that have defined me for so long. I am the woman who fell in love with her sister's ex-boyfriend, who had a secret relationship that lasted 3 months and changed everything I thought I knew about myself, who chose family loyalty over personal happiness and has spent every day since wondering if it was the right choice. There are nights when I think about calling Michael, wherever he is now in Seattle or whatever city his work has taken him to next, just to hear his voice, just to remember what it felt like to be seen and loved and chosen by someone who knew all of me, even the parts I was ashamed of. There are nights when I wonder if keeping this secret was the right thing to do, if protecting Jessica's peace was worth the cost of my own honesty, my own chance at the kind of love that transforms you from the inside out. But I don't call, because some secrets are meant to be kept, and some loves are meant to be sacrificed, and some choices echo through our lives in ways we can never fully understand, until we're older and wiser and further away from the people we used to be. I don't call because Jessica deserves her happiness, uncomplicated by the knowledge of what her sister did in the shadows of her own contentment, untouched by the mess of human desire and weakness, and all the ways we betray ourselves in service of love. Instead, I write. I write about love and loss, and the complicated mathematics of loyalty, about the ways we betray ourselves to protect other people, about the price of secrets, and the weight of carrying them alone. I write about a woman who falls in love with the wrong person at the wrong time and has to choose between her own happiness and her sister's trust. I write about guilt and desire and the space between what we want and what we deserve, between who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. And sometimes, when the writing is going well, when the words flow like they did that first night Michael told me he thought I saw things other people missed, I feel close to him again. Close to the version of myself I was when I was loved by someone who saw me completely. It's not the same as having him, not the same as the life we might have built together if circumstances had been different, if love were simple and loyalty weren't complicated, and family didn't matter more than desire. But it's something, a piece of what we had, preserved in words and memory, and the quiet knowledge that for 3 months, I was loved by someone who saw me as separate from my sister, as worthy of choice, as entirely my own person. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us really get, these brief moments of being truly seen, truly known, truly cherished, and the rest is just learning how to carry them with us, how to let them change us without destroying the people we're supposed to protect. I think about Jessica now, 7 months pregnant, and glowing with the particular radiance of a woman who has found her place in the world, who has made peace with her choices, who has built a life that fits her perfectly. I think about Michael somewhere in Seattle, photographing other people's stories, other people's moments of beauty and transformation, and I think about myself, 30 years old now, still writing novels that may never be published, still working at the library, still trying to figure out who I am, when I'm not defined by my relationships to other people. The secret I carry has become part of me now, woven into the fabric of who I am in ways I'm still discovering. It's taught me that love isn't always enough, that loyalty sometimes matters more than desire, that the most loving thing you can do is sometimes to choose someone else's happiness over your own. It's taught me that I am capable of sacrifice, of keeping promises that cost me everything I thought I wanted, of loving someone enough to let them go. There are things we bury so deep inside ourselves that after a while, we start to wonder if they ever really happened at all. But this happened. Michael and I happened, for 3 months in the gray winter of my 26th year, in coffee shops and hotel rooms and the secret spaces between text messages. We happened, and then we chose not to happen anymore. And that choice echoes through every day that follows, a quiet reminder of the person I discovered I could be when someone loved me enough to see me clearly. Sometimes Jessica asks me why I never bring anyone home anymore, why I seem content to be alone, why I don't seem interested in the kind of love she's found with Trevor. I tell her I'm focused on my writing, on my career, on figuring out who I want to be, all of which is true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I'm still carrying Michael with me, still comparing every man I meet to the one who saw me first as myself, still loving someone I can never have, and learning to find peace in the beautiful, terrible weight of a secret that belongs entirely to me.